Welcome back. Tonight, we return to the ancient world to a contest that would echo through millennia. Close your eyes, settle in, and let me ask you this. What would you give a city to prove your love? What gift could possibly be worthy of an entire civilization's devotion? Two gods stood on sacred ground, each believing they knew the answer. Only one would be remembered as Athens' true protector. This is the story of that choice and why it matters more than you might think. Picture the Acropolis as it was, long before the Parthenon, before marble temples crowned its heights. 3,000 years ago, this limestone plateau rose from the Attic plain like the spine of some sleeping giant. Wild thyme grew between the rocks. Olive trees, scattered and ancient even then, cast thin shadows in the Mediterranean sun. The wind carried salt from the Saronic Gulf, mixing with the scent of pine resin and dry earth. At the plateau's edge, the land fell away in steep cliffs, offering a view that stretched to mountains in the west and the wine-dark sea to the south. This was a place where earth met sky, where mortals felt closer to the divine. And it was here, on this sacred rock, that a city was beginning to dream itself into existence. The people who lived below the great rock had no name for their home yet. They were farmers, fishermen, potters, and weavers. Their houses were simple structures of mud, brick, and stone. They drew water from springs that bubbled up from the base of the hill. They knew the gods watched them. How could they not? Thunder rolled across the mountains. The sea rose and fell with moods they could not predict. Earthquakes shook the ground beneath their feet. The divine was not abstract to these people. It was immediate, dangerous, and necessary. And so when word spread that two gods had taken interest in their small settlement, fear and wonder moved through the population like wind through wheat. I am Athena, daughter of Zeus, born fully formed from his head, armed and ready. I speak now not as you might imagine a goddess speaks, but as I spoke then when I stood upon that rock and looked down at those mortal lives flickering below like candles in the dusk. I had watched this place for some time. I had seen these people work their looms, craft their pottery, debate in their small assemblies. I recognized something in them. Not just survival, but the stirring of civilization. The desire not merely to live, but to live well, to live with purpose and beauty and order. I wanted to nurture that. I wanted to give them the gift that would let them flourish across centuries. But I was not alone in my desire. My uncle Poseidon had come as well, and the tension between us crackled like summer lightning across that ancient sky. Poseidon, lord of the seas, earth-shaker, master of horses. He too had watched this settlement. He saw its position, so close to the coast, and understood its potential. A city here could command trade routes, build a navy, project power across the Mediterranean. He wanted it for his own. And why shouldn't he have it? He who commanded the depths, who could raise storms or calm waters, who could split the earth itself with his trident. This small city would be a jewel in his collection, another place where mortals would burn offerings in his honor and call on his name before voyages. But the people had not yet decided whom they would honor as their patron. That choice still hung in the balance, unresolved, heavy with consequence. The inciting event came not from the gods but from the mortals themselves. King Cecrops, half man and half serpent, ruler of this nameless city, called an assembly. He was old even by the standards of his mythical lineage, his wisdom earned through centuries of watching civilizations rise and fall. He stood before his people in the agora, the gathering place, and spoke in a voice that commanded silence. The city needed a patron deity. It needed divine protection, divine guidance. But which god should they choose? Both Athena and Poseidon had made their interest known. Both were powerful beyond mortal comprehension. Both were quick to anger if slighted. Cecrops proposed a solution, one that would give the choice to the gods themselves and to the people. Each deity would offer a gift. The gift deemed most valuable to the city's future would determine their patron. The gods agreed. Pride would not let them refuse. The day of the contest dawned clear and bright. The entire population climbed the winding path to the Acropolis. They came with offerings, with prayers whispered under breath, with nervous hope. Children clung to their mothers' robes. Old men leaned on staffs carved from olive wood. The king led them, his serpentine form moving with alien grace across the stones. At the highest point of the rock, two figures waited, divine and terrible and beautiful in ways that mortal eyes struggled to comprehend. Poseidon stood tall, his presence carrying the weight and depth of the ocean itself. His hair held the color of storm-tossed waves. His trident, three-pronged and gleaming, seemed to hum with barely contained power. Athena stood opposite, gray-eyed and calm, her armor catching the sunlight, her spear held loosely, almost casually, yet radiating an aura of controlled strength. The air between them shimmered with divine tension. Poseidon would go first. He stepped forward and the crowd instinctively moved back. He raised his trident high above his head, and for a moment the whole world seemed to hold its breath. Then he brought it down, striking the rock with force that should have shattered the plateau entire. The sound was like thunder trapped in stone. A crack appeared, running across the limestone, widening, deepening. And from that crack, water began to flow, not a trickle but a surging stream, bubbling up from the depths of the earth itself. The people gasped. Water on this dry rock. Water that could sustain them, that could free them from their dependence on distant springs. Poseidon turned to face them, a smile of certainty on his divine features. This was his gift. This was what he offered. But King Cecrops approached the spring carefully. He knelt, cupped his hands, brought the water to his lips, and then he tasted it. Salt. The water was salt water drawn from the sea that was Poseidon's domain. Useful, perhaps, for certain purposes. A reminder of the god's power, certainly, but not drinkable, not fit for irrigation, not the life-giving fresh water the city truly needed. The king said nothing, but his face spoke volumes. He rose slowly, turned to Athena. The goddess had watched Poseidon's display without expression. Now she stepped forward, moving with the deliberate grace of someone who knows exactly what they are about to do. Athena did not strike the rock. She did not call down lightning or summon storms. Instead, she knelt, placed her hand flat against the stone, and spoke words in the old language, the language that existed before humans gave names to things. Where her palm touched the limestone, the stone seemed to soften, to welcome what came next. A shoot appeared, green and vital, pushing up through solid rock as if the barrier between earth and air meant nothing. The shoot grew. Slowly at first, then faster, unfurling into a sapling, the sapling thickening into a trunk, branches spreading, leaves unfurling in the Mediterranean sun. In moments, a full-grown tree stood on the Acropolis, roots somehow finding purchase in bare stone, branches heavy with small green fruits that would ripen to black. An olive tree. The first olive tree, some say, that ever grew in Attica. The people stared. Poseidon's face darkened like an approaching storm. But Athena spoke, her voice carrying clearly across the plateau. This tree, she said, would provide food, both from its fruit and the oil that could be pressed from it. That oil would light their lamps, driving back the darkness of night. It would preserve their food, allowing them to store provisions through winter. It would soften their skin and heal their wounds. The wood, when pruned, would serve their needs. And most importantly, she continued, this tree was a survivor. It would live for centuries with minimal water. It would grow in poor soil. Cut it down, and it would sprout again from the root. It was a gift that would multiply because each tree could give birth to others. Within a generation, groves would cover the hillsides. Within a century, the region would be defined by it. This was not just a gift for today. This was a gift for all the tomorrows stretching ahead into the unknowable future. King Cecrops called for a vote. All citizens would participate, both men and women, a detail that would itself become part of the myth. They would choose based on which gift they deemed most valuable to their city's future. The women spoke among themselves, voices rising in excitement as they examined the olive tree, touched its leaves, marveled at the small, hard fruits. The men gathered around Poseidon's spring, some still hopeful that salt water might have its uses, others already shaking their heads. The debate continued through the afternoon, voices rising and falling, arguments made and countered. The gods waited, silent now, their rivalry hanging in the air like the stillness before a storm breaks. When the vote was called, the result surprised no one who had watched the debate. The women voted unanimously for Athena. The men were divided, but the majority also favored the olive tree over the salt spring. By one vote, the city chose Athena as its patron. The goddess inclined her head in acknowledgement, grace and triumph mixed in the gesture. Poseidon's face went dark as the deepest trench of ocean. The sea god struck his trident against the rock once more, and this time the sound was fury made audible. He declared that the city would pay for this choice, that his wrath would deny them easy access to the sea, that floods would threaten them, that naval enemies would harry their shores. He turned and vanished in a spray of salt water and the crash of phantom waves. The threat hung in the air long after he departed, but Athena remained. She stood beside her tree, one hand resting on its trunk, and she made promises of her own. She would teach them crafts, the skills that would make their city great: weaving, pottery, shipbuilding, metalwork. She would guide their laws, helping them build a society based on reason and justice rather than the whims of tyrants. She would protect them in battle when necessary, but more than that, she would help them avoid unnecessary wars through wisdom and diplomacy. The city would be named for her, Athens, and in return, she asked only what any god asks: remembrance, honor, offerings given with sincere hearts. The people agreed. How could they not? They had chosen her, and now she was choosing them in return. The aftermath unfolded across generations. The olive tree on the Acropolis became sacred, tended by priestesses, never to be cut. Cuttings from it spread across Attica and then across the Greek world. Olive cultivation became central to the Athenian economy. The oil was traded throughout the Mediterranean, bringing wealth to the city. But more than economic prosperity, Athena's influence shaped the city's character. Athens became known for its philosophers, its playwrights, its democratic experiments, its art and architecture. It became a place where wisdom was valued alongside strength, where debate could substitute for violence, where the life of the mind was considered as important as the life of the body. The patron goddess had imprinted her values onto her people. Poseidon's anger, meanwhile, never fully abated. The Athenians were never comfortable seafarers in the way that other Greek cities were. Their relationship with the ocean remained complicated, even as they built a navy that would dominate the Aegean. Every storm that struck their coast, every shipwreck, every flood, these were seen as reminders of the sea god's lingering resentment. Yet they did not ignore him. They built temples to Poseidon too, offered him sacrifices, acknowledged his power. The Athenians learned to honor both deities, to walk the line between Athena's wisdom and Poseidon's might. Perhaps that balance, that negotiation between competing divine forces, was itself a kind of wisdom. The lesson of this myth extends beyond ancient Athens. It asks us what we value when we build a civilization. Do we choose the impressive, the immediately powerful, the gift that demonstrates raw might? Or do we choose the sustainable, the thoughtful, the gift that multiplies across time? Poseidon's spring was dramatic. It was a display of divine power that no mortal could replicate, but it was ultimately limited in its usefulness. Athena's olive tree was quieter, more subtle. It required patience to appreciate, but it kept giving, generation after generation, becoming more valuable with time rather than less. The myth suggests that the wisest choices are often not the most obvious ones, that what sustains us through centuries might look humble compared to what impresses us in a moment. And perhaps there is another lesson here about how we choose our values, our guiding principles, our metaphorical patron deities. We all face this choice in smaller ways throughout our lives. Do we pursue the flashy or the substantial, the immediate or the enduring? The thing that makes us look powerful or the thing that actually serves our deepest needs? Athens chose wisdom over spectacle, cultivation over raw power, the long view over the immediate impression. And for all its flaws, for all the ways it fell short of its own ideals, Athens became a city that is still remembered, still studied, still influential thousands of years after its golden age ended. The olive tree outlasted the empire. The sacred olive on the Acropolis stood for 1,000 years. When Persians invaded and burned the Acropolis in 480 BCE, they cut down the tree and destroyed the temples. But according to the historian Herodotus, the next day a new shoot had already sprouted from the burned stump, growing a cubit in height overnight. The symbol of Athens' resilience proved itself resilient. The city was rebuilt, greater than before. The goddess had kept her promise. What she planted could not be permanently destroyed. So tonight, as you drift toward sleep, picture that first olive tree on the sacred rock. Feel the Mediterranean sun on your face, the warm stone beneath your feet. Smell the wild thyme and the salt air. Watch the silver-green leaves move in the breeze. And consider what gifts you choose for yourself, what values you plant that will keep growing long after you're gone. The gods have finished their contest. The city has made its choice. The tree stands in eternal testimony to the day when wisdom won. Thank you for listening tonight. Next time, we'll journey to a different shore where another myth waits to be remembered. If this story brought you peace, consider subscribing so you don't miss what comes next. But for now, rest well. Let the ancient world fade gently into your dreams. Good night.